Hello and welcome to another session of Steve Quartermain in conversation with, and I'm delighted to introduce as my guest today, Jenny Daly. Hello, Jenny.
Hi, Steve. How are you doing?
I'm very well indeed, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well. I'm well, thank you.
Good, good.
Busy?
Well, look, thank you very much for spending some time with me this evening and joining me in this conversation. I think it might help people to start off with if you were to sort of explain what you do.
Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of job title, I'm the chief executive of Taylor Wimpey, which is one of our nation's largest volume house builders. But as you know, Steve, my background from long ago was in planning. So I have come up through both local government and into private sector, specifically housing, over the last 30 years now, actually.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because I mean, I was going to ask you a bit about your career because I was always a great one to try and promote diversity in the profession, both in gender and ethnicity. And so I'm interested to talk to you a little bit at the beginning of this conversation about how your career sort of progressed and how you found it, and sort of what advice would you give to women who wanted to, I don't know, become chief executive of Taylor Wimpey in the future, sort of a little bit in that territory.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, look, I mean, I came to Manchester University. You can probably tell I'm not originally from England, to study planning. And and I think probably the interesting thing there, and that was the late 80s, was that the course was probably about 50-50,
Oh,
male and female, at that time. And I think it had gradually being sort of balanced. The difference was that when we all finally hit the real world and went into employment, the balance of those who went into and stayed in planning changed. So fewer women who sort of maintained a career in planning. I think some of that is honestly around the time frame. So I had the misfortune of graduating in 1992, which was just coming near the end of a recession, which hit the sort of construction, house building planning environment pretty hard. You might remember, and so all the, or not all, but many of the traditional sort of employment routes
yeah.
were fairly tight, and so I do think that had some impact. I went from university. My first role was in Blackpool, a planning officer at Blackpool Borough Council, and at that time, actually, on a gender balance basis, also quite a number of, I have to say, very strong-willed females, but all at the sort of the junior end. So the seniority, chief planner, head of development control policy, was very male dominated. But you could see the changes coming through, and I think really importantly, starting to see women appearing, at senior levels, um, and operating in the northwest at the time. I think some very formidable planning barristers, female planning barristers, who struck terror into the hearts of planning officers. But again, role modeling, some very strong, experienced, skilled women, operating in the built environment,
Yeah, yeah,
which
yeah.
is still very male dominated. I moved then to Macclesfield, which obviously doesn't exist anymore. It's part of Cheshire East, but Macclesfield Council, that was partly balancing up what was a early start in sort of urban planning regen, to sort of more green belts, sort of constraining planning authority. So for me, it was about balancing up my sort of early credentials, so to speak. And that probably was a little bit more traditional, sort of fewer women in the profession, but that's also where an early sort of attraction or interest in housing started to mature. I've always been interested in housing. As you know, I'm from Northern Ireland. Through my young life, housing was a very challenging environment in Northern Ireland. So quite a formative sort of issue for me, and became really very interested, um, and decided to make the move from local government out into the
Yeah.
sector. I considered at that point consultancy and housing, and decided really that it suited me better to be, sort of in the doing end rather than the advising end. And my first role was into strategic land, and I think I was really lucky. I went to into a company called Westbury, which doesn't exist anymore, having been subsumed through those years in the 2000s. But the strategic land department was also very balanced. There were some very, very experienced senior women, and I suppose why that's interesting is I don't think that it was entirely indicative of the environment that lots of women would have found at the time.
Right.
Westbury was quite forward facing. I had a really strong role model in Keith George, who you may have come across, Steve, but many involved in housing would have come across. And Keith was a great mentor and role model, and he was really gender blind. It was very much about skills, opportunity, development, passion for the role. And I think that set me personally up, very well. That meritocracy. And I had the pleasure to work with a number of very senior men who really there was no differentiation at all in the way that they would have worked with me, or the expectations that they would have had with me, and that's quite liberating, as well. And certainly no feeling in my view of bias. I moved on then to a slightly different, a private company. That was smaller and very much, quite an accelerated, high-paced, high-challenge environment, which I think, moving away just a little bit from the ED&I, set me up for, I think, resilience, really. Actually, how to stand my ground on an issue that I felt strongly about, how to make my case, actually, be, far more commercial. But, I think that small private companies probably find it more challenging to engage in that sort of ED&I, that's broader landscape, because, the outcomes, the pace that at which you move, makes it much more sort of challenging to introduce those policies. And in my time at Redrow, they were looking at sort of apprenticeships, encouraging sort of more females apprenticeships, and all of the policies then you would expect from a sort of a FTSE 250 company, becoming really very sort of policy driven, messaging from the top coming down through the business around sort of balance, equality, and diversity. I moved to Taylor Wimpey in 2014, and one of the reasons that I decided to move to Taylor Wimpey was that they had a very strong culture around development, and they had a particularly strong sort of succession mentality and sort of bringing people on through the business, which was something that it was quite refreshing how open that discussion was within the business compared to some of the smaller businesses that I had been involved in, where it really there wasn't the fluidity of that of that sort of dialogue. And over time, and as I sort of became more senior, ED&I have become sort of really important elements of our business. We're in a business that suffers from skills right across, whether that's in build all the way through to some of the technical professions, including planning. We have a great diversity of roles, again, everything from build through to planning, land, accounts, customer service. And there were some roles that would be considered very traditionally female, and some roles that would be considered very traditionally male. And and it's really pleasing, particularly over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, to see some of those gender stereotypes and those really solidly sort of gender specific or stereotyped roles breaking down. And and I think we're making really good progress.
Jennie, listening to that, it's a fantastic story. But it's interesting how the culture of the organisation was at the heart of the sort of success and the liberation and the generation, which is in a way, that is the lesson that anybody listening to this might want to take away from that. So that is a really great story. I want to ask you a bit about, because but when I was chief planner and you used to come in and see me, and what I'm about to say is, I mean, it's a huge compliment. Was that whenever I knew Jennie Daly was coming to see me, I knew I had to be on my mettle, because boy, did you know your stuff. And you know, you'd come in and you'd lay all this stuff on the table, and I'd be sitting there going, "Oh my God," because you didn't have to know your stuff. Now, developers are often seen as being sort of like the people that are trying to concrete over the countryside and trying to do bad stuff. They're the bad guys in lots of people's eyes. But I wonder whether you could just talk a bit about how I know you're not strictly in planning now, because you're doing your current role, but from your experience and picking up from what you're doing at Wimpy's, I mean, how do you see the role of your company and companies like yours, and what are you trying to do, and why do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, look, a really excellent question, and probably come at it, from a number of different ways. I mean, genuinely, and it might sound a bit, yeah, sort of crass, but I see our business, Taylor Wimpey, but also our sectors having, one of the best fundamental social purpose. If we search for what is our social purpose, and lots of businesses have to work really hard to define what it is, ours is right there, to deliver, good quality homes, to our nation. Something that's highly in demand. There's a real deficit of housing. So, I'm, extremely proud to be part of, housing the nation. And I think that's where the tension really starts. That we all
Yeah,
know, when you stand back, that we want, I've got, sort of two children. I want them to be capable of accessing good quality housing. I want that to be possible for everyone. And I do worry, and I genuinely mean worry, that when the consequences of not properly housing our nation, are quite significant and extreme, it might be a very slow creep, but poor quality housing, overcrowding means deferred, formation of households. Deferred formation of households means falling birth rates. The overcrowding, reduced quality of housing because there's just nowhere to move people.
yeah,
Reduction in renewal, refurbishment. Sort of appropriate demolition, the economic and social consequences of all of that. So you can sort of stand back and really look at, the power of, I think, what we deliver. But, and it's something that I've spoken about sort of before, and you might remember, when you get down to a local level, people, naturally are afraid of change.
yeah,
Change is, it's quite a hard thing, and particularly in your built environment, and if you've lived there for a long time, because it's hard not to be selfish. How will this impact me? Will it lengthen my journey to work because I have to sit in traffic? Am I going to be able to get an appointment at the doctor's surgery? Will
yeah,
there be
yeah,
for my children at school? With this influx of population, but really, housing doesn't generate, a significant level of population. It facilitates homes, for population and need. So at the very local level, it becomes quite individual. I have a fear of change. I'm not comfortable with the change, and that can be quite hard to engage with. At
yeah.
the strategic level, which is where sort of planning and local plans and all these things come in, then, there's the more objectivity. There is this need. It's incumbent upon us as a society to meet need. And then, part of planning that I, sort of really love is, then it's part of our role as a profession to help identify where's the most appropriate, sustainable place to put, whether it's housing or support services or employment opportunities and other things. And I find it a really engaging and sort of rewarding career at that level. It just gets
Yeah.
harder and harder the further down to
Further down you go. Well,
down to the,
let me sort of give you an example, to try and build on that. A friend of ours recently sent us an email, and said, would I be able to help them with a small problem? And so I opened up the email, and they basically want to object to a planning application, and it's for 600 houses or so. I emailed them back and said, look, I'm not the person to talk to about this because I think we need more houses. And I said, well, have you thought about engaging with the developer to see what benefits the developer might bring to your community?
Yeah.
Sort of, at what point? Which brings me to the question, which is when you talk to communities, and I did a conversation with Rosie Pearson, who's Planning Alliance. And she was making the point that so often developers have already made their mind up about what's going to happen, and when they consult and engage with communities, and I paraphrase, when they engage with communities, they are telling the communities what they're going to do, and so they're consulting on what is going to happen. And what Rosie was saying was that they felt that there should be a way through the planning system of communities being more engaged in the first place to sort of shape what it is that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, you can see me sort of wincing a little bit. And it depends where you come in, doesn't it? And I think that one of the failings, and Mark Skilbeck, who's Taylor Wimpey's UK planning director now, we have some really interesting, sort of debates and discussions. And, and one of the things is, the local plan process, which I am, I'm violent supporter of sort of the local plan system. It's probably where the engagement isn't good enough. It's a complex, long-winded, long time framed engagement that not all communities really either have a voice, the ability to engage, or really understand the opportunity of engaging. So the Taylor and there, we have engagement is fully embedded within our business, and we do that at a local plan sort of promotional stage as well as through into planning application, but it's not always encouraged by local authorities, and it's not always engaging in the breadth of the community. So
is that because local authorities think that if you engage in consultation at the plan stage, then there's a risk of predetermining what might be in the plan?
I think that there's a multiple reasons. Sometimes because the local authority wants to be more in control of the process. It is very much process is owned by local authorities, and and I respect that. Sometimes it's because you don't have all the answers. Because it's a strategic planning stage. So there's a variety. There's a variety of reasons why I think it can be uncomfortable. But so if you're a community and the local plan has already established an allocation, and a developer comes in, and that allocation not only is just some housing here, but actually, a mix, for example, prescribed mix, or a statement of, what infrastructure, community infrastructure, Section 106 obligations, then, the developer will try to create a scheme that's compliant with the local plan policy. Now, what I'm not doing is pushing all the blame back to the local authority, but to an extent, if you skip the local plan engagement stage, then there is a level of sort of predetermination. The capacity or the density is X, the road hierarchy is Y. Occasionally, we will have, as development master plans as the next stage after a local plan, but before the planning application, and not all of those are well, introduced or engaged with on the local authority or local community, or the community that we're engaging with isn't the community. And I think that's the other thing. Who is the community? Is it the nearest? Is it the neighbourhood? Is it the electoral ward? Is it
that's been an old chestnut.
And it's not so much who has the right. Everyone has the right to make a comment, but there is a sense of those that get involved aren't always representative of the community, but they may have some particular issues. So look, I think that this is a challenge of our generation, really. What's the level of engagement? But I can see why some communities would feel that there's a level of preset you've already made up your mind, because they joined the discussion or the debate quite late in the life of a development, the continuum of a development, can be decades, as you know.
Yeah.
And, and
So
they're
tell me then, I mean, one of the things that I've talked to you, I think I talked to you about it before, is the fact that sometimes I feel that the language that we use differs. So it's always struck me as something that planners will talk about a number of houses per hectare or per, whether it's 35 or whatever it is.
yeah, yeah.
But as a developer, I mean, how and I don't want us to get too technical, but from a developer's point of view, when you look at a site as a developer, you must talk, and you often talk about floor space. How much footage can you get off a site? Because there's a price per footage, and you have a ratio of sort of how much development needs to come from that site in order for it to make it worth a while to do. Because you don't, although I get your social purpose challenge, you don't build houses sort of philanthropically. You build houses because you need to make a profit too. Because
No, you're right, Steve. But more than 20% of my output last year was affordable housing.
yeah,
So,
okay,
there's there is a significant element of what we do, which is of societal benefit, and sort of not as profitable as as open market housing. Look, we are commercial businesses, and and I make no apology for that. If we weren't commercially robust, then we would be in a whole heap of trouble, as a country, and not able to deliver housing. And and look, there's sensitive balances in that, whether it's too much profit and other things, but we have to be investable businesses. And that means, investors have to feel that they're getting a reasonable return for the risk. And I think over time, the level of risk involved in development has increased. And, risk is priced then, sort of around sort of investability, share price, and other elements. But there's a number of drivers around that sort of square foot coverage, and and other things. And it starts off with, well, what we want is efficient, viable developments. And landowners, that's the willing seller, willing buyer, which all sort of valuation starts from. Well, we have to find a willing seller. So the landowner requires a return that they consider acceptable. And the thing about land sales is you only get to sell it once. And if you're a farmer, then, if you sell your farm and you intend to, continue with that livelihood, you need to have a sufficient return to buy
yeah,
another farm, and, all the servants and various things. Then there are planning policy drivers for the efficiency of land. If a local authority is concerned about having to allocate land, if they're constrained in other ways, then they will want to achieve higher and higher densities. So it's not all one-way traffic. There is a balance. So but those are shorthands. That's shorthand language around how we run sort of land appraisals. And what we operate on, as you know, is a residual valuation basis, which is what's the gross development value minus development costs minus financing costs.
yeah,
We have to profit and what's left for the land value. The development cost element is something that has moved, in my career in house building, has moved considerably because of the weight of planning obligation. You might say the burden of planning obligation that's been placed on, on new development. And so, if we want to make that and still achieve a reasonable profit for our business, and achieve a viable sort of land value for the landowner, then making sure that we're as efficient as possible in the way that we sort of design our schemes is really important.
yeah. Well, I suppose it's probably, to be frank, another Zoom session altogether. If I say, well, is the proposed change is going to make that any easier? But for the moment, I won't ask you to answer that. But I will go on to talk about, in a similar vein, about, well, when you look at a site, then one of the criticisms of all volume house builders has been, well, they just have a 6 or 7 templates that the standard house types. So everywhere looks the same, and they build the same houses in Carlisle as they build in Plymouth or whatever. And in the background, you've got this noise about, well, everywhere should be beautiful. You know, the MPPF change, you need to have places that are beautiful and should be sort of within the sort of character of existing settlements. And there's even a suggestion in the last consultation that, you know, if it wasn't in character, then you know, developers would be you know, not allowed to proceed. Well, how do you sort of view
Trying
all
to
this?
square all of that. I know it's
Yeah,
challenging, isn't it? And look, I remember you and I having a really robust conversation about standard house types. I mean, look, why do we have standard house types? Because first of all, we know our customer. You know, we understand what need is, but what we aren't doing is building on a bespoke basis. You know, we build our homes and we're trying to sell them as we're building them. So, you know, we look for house types that appeal to a range of, you know, customers. You know, it would be wrong to think that 3-bed homes are only bought by young, you know, sort of young families growing. They can be bought by, you know, sort of for all different reasons from all different demographics. So
yeah,
we're trying to match that. Um, we don't have 7 or 8. We've got, you know, sort of 40
yeah,
or more. We've, you know, we don't build identikit homes from Newcastle to Newquay. We, you know, vernacularize them. So we wrap them in different ways. We are responsive to the character of the area, and, you know, whether that's brick, you know, render, you know, flint, you know, clapboard. There's a variety of different approaches why we try to be respectful of the character of the area. But what standard house types give us is a repeatability, and that repeatability
yeah.
drives quality. It drives efficiency of build, and particularly in a time when, you know, the speed of build and resources to build can be challenging, to meet what are now a complex suite of building regulations, you know, which are really very sensitive. And if we were bespoking, then that would be quite a significant burden. And the prospect of, you know, sort of increasing customer quality issues would be high. And then, you know, for the obvious cost and supply chain sort of efficiencies
Yeah,
that
yeah.
come with that. But I want to be, you know, really clear too. That's not new. You know, the Georgians built to patent books, the Victorians built to patent books. You know, if you go on the Northern Line in London, you know, you'll see all the interwar expansions. Some of them had like 4 or 5 house types that they built repetitively. And, you know, the interwar homes are some of the most in demand, you know, in the
Well, it's
country.
funny you should say that because around I live in East London, and a lot of development around here is Warner flats, known as Warner flats because Warner built them,
Yes.
and they're very popular indeed. But they are a standard house type.
So look, I think that the thing about beauty, and, you know, and I think too, I I have a slight difficulty with beauty, not because I don't think things should be beautiful, but again, you know, I have been in a planning authority, I have been a planning officer, and beauty is just a little bit more subjective and ephemeral. Good quality design, something that is quantitative and qualitative, that, you know, you can reach a level of consensus and agreement that that's good design, I think is an easier language to
Yeah,
deal with.
it's
But
interesting. That's interesting, Jenny. Because I mean, I suppose I always used to ask when I was chief planner, whenever I was faced with a proposal, sort of, how does this work? You know, sort of, how do you think this is going to work? Oh, and it's interesting when I came to tree-lined streets, which is a great concept, and who doesn't want to live in tree-lined streets? But and there are lots of tree-lined streets in London. But some of the practicalities, which I was talking to a street lighting person quite recently, that says one of the problems with tree-lined streets is they're getting away with the light.
yes, and, you know, I mean, they get in the way of a lot of things, but also, you know, if you think about some of those tree-lined streets, they were at a time when we didn't have optic, you know, cable, and we didn't have telecom,
Yeah,
and we
yeah,
didn't have all of those things. But look, to go back to the beauty, you know, the beauty point, you know, I strongly believe that the building is important, but the building can be allowed to be functional. It's the space between buildings. It's the condition of the space, you know, functional, open space. You know, is it,
yeah,
you know, serendipitous meeting places? How do people personalize their private or the semi-private space? And those are the things, to go back to those repetitive streets in parts of London, just as an example, it's, it's how people have coloured their doors. It's, whether they've grown hedges or built a wall. It's, those are some of the things that add character and distinctiveness, not the actual, not necessarily the home itself. So, I think that, placemaking is something that I'm, particularly committed to, and we've done a lot of work within Taylor Wimpey, to sort of
Yeah.
advance our placemaking theory. But, in the end, community drives, some of that, what we get the most sense of
Yeah.
a place. It's not always just the bricks and mortar. I think the space between them and how community engages with that is really the defining element.
Now, Jenny, I know you're not a planner. No, well, actually, you're always a planner, aren't you? I always think that there's a planner in everybody, really. But I know you don't practice as a planner at the moment. But looking at the current planning system, not the one that's proposed, but the one that we're currently living in. To what extent do you, from your position now, see that as a thing that is broken? I mean, is it something that, well, if it doesn't work for you or for the community, why do you think it doesn't work? Did you have a sort of a favorite bête noire, sort of, if only they did this, it would work better?
Yeah, well, I think I've been quoted before saying, it's the worst I've ever known, in a career that's starting to feel quite long. And I that is something that I very carefully considered saying. I thought about it. It's not just a throwaway comment. So I genuinely believe it. I see how challenging and difficult it is for all sides of the planning debate, local authorities. I am extremely worried about the level of resources, Steve, in local authorities, and just how that's impacting morale and sort of engagement. So, maybe not broken, but certainly creaking. And I worry about, just how much more it can withstand. And I think short policy, let's call them movements, short-term policy movements, has really overburdened, the system. I think. That's created, quite a lot of tension and difficulty around decision making, at a local level, which has put an additional sort of stress. It's become highly political, as we know, and it would be wrong to ignore that. But I think when you look at the level of resource reduction, vacancies, funding going into planning departments, I can't help but think that, it doesn't matter how perfectly crafted the regulation would be. If we had this, miraculous sort of planning act to save us all, unless we have the people, the expertise, and the, sort of that are confident in making those decisions, then we're not going to get a decision making in a planning system that genuinely works for us. So, for me, resources are a big issue. I think also that we seem to have drifted into this world where it's either environmental protection or it's development, and environmental protection is good and development is bad, rather than actually, all of our role, in the planning profession, and those of us in the built environment, is to demonstrate that we can marry them. We can bring forward good quality built form and sort of development, whilst protecting and enhancing. And biodiversity again is sort of a clear example of that. Our environment, it isn't all sort of ripping up sort of green fields. It's contributing and improving, sort of the environmental quality, access to public open space, delivering linkages, all of those things. So I think that we have fallen into this, it's one or the other, and there's no sort of blending of the two. And that's what our profession has always done. It's to balance the land use needs with, other material considerations, and trying to come up with the appropriate balance and the best possible outcome, bearing in mind that certain forms of development are needed, and the absence of those, as I said earlier, I think could lead to some serious consequences for us on a social and
Yeah, I
an
think you're right.
economic basis.
I think you're right. And again, I probably won't ask you to comment a bit, but I mean, some of the reforms which are being promoted, the LERB and the NPPF changes. I mean, just that process suddenly led to a whole load of local plans stalling,
Yeah.
which if you want a plan-led system, then it does seem a bit counterintuitive to arrive at a situation where we now have a prediction of less houses being built. I think I thought, was it House Builders Federation said something like 120,000 was going to be the likely outcome, and when the target is 300, it does seem that
We're
it's
going
not.
in the wrong direction.
Yeah, it does. It does a bit, doesn't it? Perhaps it's not the system that's broken, but it's application. Listen, we're running out of time, Jenny, but I wanted to so in that same sort of area, talk about it. Well, is there one thing that you think might fix this? And if you were sort of Secretary of State for the day, what would you do? Would it be to bring back regional planning? Would it be to have a more holistic approach to that, as you were saying, that environment development? Development brings benefits. Development can actually help solve some of these problems. What would you do? What do you think that would be your main wish?
Yeah. Can I have three? I don't know.
Oh, of course you can. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course.
yeah. I mean, look, I think that for me, I think one of the things that I find sort of hardest to really sort of get my head around is, I see housing as, sort of part of our infrastructure. I mean, you can hear, of course, I think it's important, but how important housing is, and so I struggle with the absence of a national housing policy. Well, I'd love there to be a national housing plan that, oh my
Oh,
God,
no, a national plan. Yeah, absolutely.
might
Yeah,
actually marry up with the national infrastructure plan. But
yeah,
maybe that's but having a conversation, on a sort of on a wide basis about the importance and need for housing, and that's an absence, and so we're not seeing any longevity, which planning needs to get to truly deliver all the benefits and opportunity that I think, really get into its stride and, sort of deliver what we were all, sort of trained and enjoyed doing. It needs runway, it needs time. And that's what all of these short term,
yeah,
sort of decisions have made. So something that at a national level that conceives the importance of housing, both from a social and an economic and a, sort of sustainability basis, and then helps to drive the dialogue right down to that micro, we're proposing a development next to, a
yeah,
village, and
yeah,
here's the conversation. But that infrastructure, delivery, you mentioned cell and infrastructure levy, and I'm not going to get sucked into that. But, I do think that we're also missing, things that we would see in some of our European neighbours, where there's a real sort of marrying of housing and other development needs with the delivery of
yeah,
national infrastructure.
yeah, absolutely.
It's just the timeliness and so regional. I think that regional planning, as a structure worked. I think some of the conditions that it operated in, two-tier authorities, has passed us by now. We've got unitary authorities, we've got
Yeah,
devolved.
yeah,
And so I think it's too big a step to go back. But certainly that bigger than local is something that I think is needed. So yeah, my one wish would be a national housing policy that we can then use to drive through the sort of the tiers of planning, local plans and decision making.
yeah. So was there a second and a third?
Well, I think that that infrastructure, I think that
Yeah, okay.
that's an issue that we're missing. And then probably, if the magic wand allowed me one more, well, why wouldn't it be if I was, sort of in the position to do that, our the decision making, the PINS process, just the speed, streamlining, sort of the decision making process has got to be one of them.
Yeah. Jenny, you and I could talk about this for another hour and a half, I think. It's absolutely fantastic. So thank you very much for your time and for your insights. It's been absolutely fantastic. Thank you very much, and let's see what happens in the months coming up. Thank you,
Well,
Jenny Daly.
no problem. Thank you, Steve. It's been lovely of you to have me.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much.